All right, so today we're going to deep dive into something that I bet you haven't given much thought to. And to be honest, I hadn't given that much thought to before I started researching it for today, and that is your first rib.
Yeah.
You guys sent in some info about it, and I have to admit, even I was kind of surprised by how much this little bone can actually affect us.
It's true. Most people, don't realize the first rib is really tucked away up high behind your collarbone, like not where you would think it is, like in the middle of the rib cage.
Right, yeah, exactly. So using this article from Revo Physiotherapy and Sports Performance, let's unpack why the first rib matters, especially if you're dealing with pain.
If you spend hours, like many of us do,
Yeah.
at a desk, or maybe you lug around a heavy backpack,
Yeah.
you're putting a lot of stress on the muscles that attach to your first rib, and that can have a ripple effect throughout your upper body.
Oh, okay, that's got my attention.
Yeah.
I'm definitely guilty of the laptop punch.
Sure.
So to understand this better, we need a quick anatomy lesson, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the first rib, it has a pretty unique position. It attaches to both your spine and your sternum, forming the top of your rib cage.
Okay.
And the key players here are the scalene muscles,
Okay.
which connect your neck to your first rib.
Gotcha.
And these muscles are essential for things like head movement, breathing.
So are you saying that every time I turn my head or take a breath, my first rib is involved?
Exactly. And then to make things even more interesting, a bundle of nerves and blood vessels pass right through this very, very small area.
Oh, wow.
So any tension or restriction in those scalene muscles can really impact those nerves and those vessels, leading to pain, numbness, or even tingling down your arm.
Wow, it's like a bottleneck for all those important pathways.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, if my scalene muscles are tight, my first rib can kind of get pulled out of alignment, and then everything around it starts to suffer.
Yeah, precisely. That's why posture is so crucial. Let's take the classic forward head posture, the one we all do when we're staring at screens for hours on end.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, all too well.
Well, imagine what that does to your scales. They're constantly stretched and strained, trying to hold up your head.
Right.
That chronic tension just pulls on your first rib, and over time can lead to, we call it first rib dysfunction.
And that's when the trouble really starts, right? I'm starting to see how this seemingly, insignificant bone can be a major player in things like neck and shoulder pain.
Yeah, it's not just the pain either. Remember those nerves and blood vessels we talked about?
Yeah.
When they get compressed, it can affect everything from your circulation to the signals traveling down your arm.
Right.
You might experience numbness, tingling, weakness, even coldness in your hand.
Okay, this is getting a little scary.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think we should all be paying a lot more attention to our first ribs. But before we spiral into full-blown first rib anxiety, are there any early warning signs we should be looking out for?
Well, as we've discussed, neck and shoulder pain are common red flags.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Not all neck pain is created equal.
So how can you tell if it's your first rib acting up?
That's a great question. I'm all ears.
One key distinction is the location of the pain.
Okay.
With first rib dysfunction, you'll often feel it higher up in your neck, almost at the base of your skull, and it might radiate into your shoulder blade or down the back of your arm.
So it's more than just that general stiffness you get after a long day.
Exactly. It's a more specific localized pain.
Gotcha.
And it might be accompanied by other symptoms like headaches, dizziness, or that tingling sensation we talked about.
Right.
If you notice these symptoms, especially if they're persistent or worsen with certain movements, it's a good idea to consult with a healthcare professional.
That makes sense. So it's not just about treating the pain, it's about figuring out the root cause.
Right.
And if that root cause happens to be your first rib, what are the options? Can anything be done to fix it?
There are a number of approaches,
Okay.
and the best one will depend on the individual and the severity of their condition.
Right.
But generally speaking, treatment focuses on restoring proper alignment of the first rib
Okay.
and releasing tension in those tight scalene muscles.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these treatment options.
Well, one approach involves manual therapy techniques where a trained professional uses their hands to mobilize the first rib and stretch the surrounding muscles.
Okay.
This can be incredibly effective in restoring normal joint mechanics and relieving pressure on those nerves and blood vessels.
So it's like a targeted massage for your first rib.
You could think of it that way.
Okay.
And in addition to manual therapy, there are also exercises and stretches you can do at home to help lengthen and strengthen the muscles that support your first rib.
That sounds promising. Can you give us a sneak peek at some of those exercises? I'm always up for some DIY self-care.
Of course.
Yeah.
But before we get into specifics, it's important to emphasize that these exercises should be done with caution
Yeah.
and ideally under the guidance of a qualified professional.
Right.
We want to make sure you're doing them correctly
Yeah.
and that they're appropriate for your specific situation.
Good point. Safety first, especially when we're dealing with something as sensitive as our necks and shoulders.
Yeah.
So with that disclaimer in mind, what kind of exercises are we talking about?
Well, one simple yet effective exercise involves using a yoga strap or even just a rolled up towel.
Okay.
You place the strap across your upper back, holding the ends with your hands, and then gently pull down, creating a stretch across your chest and shoulders. This helps to open up the chest and release tension in the scalene muscles.
That sounds doable.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see how it would target those tight spots.
Exactly. And there are other variations you can try as well,
Okay.
like side bends and rotations, which further mobilize the first rib and improve range of motion.
Okay. I'm adding yoga strap stretches to my to-do list, but I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to first rib care. What else can we do to keep this little bone happy and healthy?
There's definitely more to explore. But let's take a pause here and pick up our discussion in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, listeners, stay tuned. We'll be back soon to delve even deeper into the world of the first rib and uncover more strategies for optimal health and well-being.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the fascinating world of the first rib. I don't know about you, but I'm already feeling a lot more aware of this often overlooked part of my anatomy.
It's amazing how much we take our bodies for granted,
Right.
until something starts to hurt.
Right, exactly.
And the first rib is a perfect example of how something small can have a really big impact.
Absolutely. We've talked about posture and those tight scalene muscles, but the article also mentioned something else that surprised me, and that was breathing.
Yeah, that's right. The way we breathe can actually influence the position and mobility of our first rib.
Okay.
Think about it. Your diaphragm, that large muscle that sits below your lungs, attaches to your lower ribs. When you take a deep breath in, your diaphragm contracts and pulls those ribs downward, creating space in your chest cavity.
Okay, so far so good.
Yeah.
But how does this connect to the first rib, which is way up top?
Well, it's all connected.
Okay.
When your diaphragm isn't working optimally, you might start relying more on your accessory breathing muscles like those scalenes we talked about earlier.
Right.
These muscles are designed to help with breathing, especially during strenuous activity.
Right.
But they shouldn't be doing the heavy lifting all the time.
So if I'm constantly taking shallow breaths, my scalenes are working overtime, which can then pull on my first rib and create all sorts of problems.
Exactly. It becomes like a vicious cycle.
Oh, wow.
Shallow breathing leads to tight scalenes pull on the first rib, and the first rib can then restrict movement and cause pain.
Yeah, it's a domino effect.
Yeah.
So what can we do about it? Is it as simple as just like taking deeper breaths?
It's a really good starting point.
Okay.
Learning to engage your diaphragm and breathe deeply can make a huge difference. Okay.
Not only does it improve oxygen intake and circulation, but it also helps to relax those overactive scalenes, giving your first rib some much-needed relief.
Okay, I'm sold on the benefits of deep breathing, but I have to admit, I'm not always the best at remembering to do it. Any tips for incorporating it into our daily lives?
Absolutely. One simple technique is to practice belly breathing.
Okay.
So you can find a comfortable position, place one hand on your chest and the other on your belly.
Okay.
And as you inhale, focus on expanding your belly like a balloon.
Right.
As you exhale, gently draw your belly button in towards your spine.
I see how that would help engage the diaphragm rather than just using those chest muscles.
Exactly. And you can do this anytime, anywhere.
Right.
Sitting in their desk, waiting in line, even before you go to sleep.
Yeah.
The more you practice, the more natural it will become.
Great advice. So we've covered posture, breathing. What else should we be mindful of when it comes to first rib health?
Well, the article doesn't specifically mention this, but I think it's important to talk about stress.
When we're stressed, our bodies go into fight or flight mode. And one of the physiological responses is muscle tension.
Oh, yeah. I definitely hold my stress in my shoulders and neck.
And guess which muscles are located right there in that area? You got it, the scalings.
Right.
So when you're chronically stressed, those muscles are constantly tense, pulling on your first rib and potentially contributing to dysfunction.
It's like a never-ending cycle of tension and pain.
Yeah.
So managing stress is not just good for our mental health, but for our physical well-being, especially when it comes to our first rib.
Precisely. Incorporating stress-reducing activities into your routine, like meditation, yoga, or even just taking a few minutes each day to relax and breathe deeply can make a world of difference.
That's a great reminder.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of life and just forget to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
But as we're learning, even small changes can have a big impact on our overall health and well-being.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's so important to pay attention to those subtle signals our bodies are sending us.
Right.
Pain, discomfort, stiffness, these are all messages that something might be off.
Right.
And while we might not always be able to pinpoint the exact cause, it's worth exploring and seeking professional guidance if needed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, dear listeners, if you're experiencing any of the symptoms we've discussed, neck pain, shoulder pain, tingling in your arm, don't just brush it off.
Right.
It might be your first rib trying to tell you something.
And as we've learned, addressing those issues early on can prevent them from becoming bigger problems down the road.
Right.
So let's talk about what happens when those early warning signs are missed.
Okay.
Sometimes first rib dysfunction can lead to a condition called thoracic outlet syndrome.
Okay, that sounds serious.
Yeah.
What exactly is thoracic outlet syndrome?
Thoracic outlet syndrome, or TOS,
Okay.
occurs when the nerves and blood vessels in the space between your collarbone and first rib become compressed.
Okay.
This can happen for a variety of reasons, including first rib dysfunction, anatomical variations, or repetitive movements that irritate the area.
So it's like that bottleneck we talked about earlier, but even more extreme.
Exactly. And the symptoms of TOS can be quite varied, depending on which structures are compressed.
Wow.
Some people experience pain, numbness, or tingling in their arm and hand,
Okay.
while others might have weakness, swelling, or even discoloration in their fingers.
That sounds pretty debilitating. What are the treatment options for TOS?
The good news is that many cases of TOS can be managed conservatively with physical therapy, exercises, and lifestyle modifications.
Okay.
However, in some cases, surgery may be necessary to relieve the compression.
Wow, this is definitely a topic that deserves its own deep dive.
Yeah.
But for now, I think we've covered a lot of ground when it comes to the first rib and its potential impact on our health. Are there any final thoughts you want to share before we wrap up this part of our discussion?
I think the key takeaway here is that our bodies are incredibly complex and interconnected.
Right.
What might seem like a minor issue, like a stiff neck or occasional tingling in your hand, could actually be a sign of something more significant. So it's important to pay attention to those signals.
Yeah.
Seek professional guidance when needed,
Right.
and take proactive steps to support our overall well-being.
Beautifully said. And on that note, let's take a short break and come back for the final part of our deep dive into the first rib. We'll explore some additional resources and strategies that can help you stay pain-free and functioning at your best. And we're back for the final part of our first rib exploration. I gotta say, I'm really starting to appreciate this little bone and how much it can impact, like, my well-being.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah.
From anatomy and posture to breathing and stress. I mean, we've really covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have. And before we wrap things up, I wanted to revisit that article from Revo Physiotherapy.
Okay.
The author, Dane, he mentions that he sees a lot of athletes, particularly those who like carry heavy backpacks or do repetitive overhead movements.
Right.
And they come to him with first rib issues.
Yeah, that's a great observation. It highlights how certain activities, even ones that we consider healthy, can put extra stress on this area.
Right.
Think about like hikers, skiers, even people who work in construction or nursing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all susceptible to first rib dysfunction.
So it's not just a matter of what you carry, but how you carry it.
Exactly.
I imagine backpack fit and weight distribution play a big role.
Absolutely. A poorly fitted backpack, especially one that's overloaded or sits too low, can pull your shoulders back and down, increasing tension in those scalene muscles.
Right.
And over time, that can lead to a cascade of problems, including first rib dysfunction.
Okay, so for all our listeners who are hitting the trails or tackling those home improvement projects, it's worth taking a moment to assess your backpack situation.
Yeah.
Make sure it fits properly, distribute the weight evenly, and adjust those straps to minimize strain on your shoulders and neck.
Exactly. And this brings us back to a theme we've touched on throughout this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
The importance of listening to your body.
Right.
If you're feeling pain, numbness, or tingling, don't ignore it.
Right.
It's your body's way of telling you something's not quite right.
So true. And while we've explored some helpful strategies today for addressing first rib issues, it's important to remember that we're not medical professionals. If you are experiencing any persistent problems, seeking guidance from a qualified healthcare provider or physical therapist is always the best course of action.
Couldn't agree more. They can really assess your individual situation, determine the underlying cause of your symptoms, and develop a personalized treatment plan to address your specific needs.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot more empowered and knowledgeable about my first rib now. Who knew such a small bone could hold so much power?
Yeah, it's a great reminder that even the seemingly insignificant parts of our body play such a vital role in our overall health and well-being.
Right.
And when we take the time to understand how these parts work and what can go wrong, we can take better care of ourselves.
Yeah, and on that note, dear listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring. Pay attention to your body, ask questions, seek out information that empowers you to make informed decisions about your health.
Because ultimately, knowledge is power.
Right.
And when it comes to our bodies, the more we know, the better equipped we are to live healthy, vibrant lives.
So until our next deep dive, keep those curious minds engaged. And remember, every part of you deserves a little love and attention, even that tiny but mighty first rib.